Hello, Gabriel. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you guys as always. Um, I've been using this microphone for recording, so if it's not loud enough, let me know. It's got a little. Most microphones don't have this, but this has a volume knob on the back of it. And when I record, I have to put it all the way down to nothing. Hello, Hans. Hans asked, when is the region music coming out? And I think, um, and he says hello, by the way, howdy. Um, Gabriel says it's not a microphone, it's a shuttle. um, I'm not really following the the region stuff this year. So usually it comes out when they have um it comes out when they have TBA, that's Texas Band Association. That's a convention that they have, I think, in the end of July. So it might be out now. If not, it's out in the next couple days. But you know what? That said, I looked, the etudes were already announced. I think I looked 2 weeks ago. So they must have published it earlier this year. It's the it's urban characteristic studies. I don't remember which one. In the Q and A couple weeks ago, someone asked if I was going to record the All-State music. Oh, actually, it wasn't 2 weeks ago. It was a week ago. And I said, no, I won't be because there's so many great recordings of that out there that it doesn't make sense. I wish there was a way to zoom in here. I'm so small. I'll step on a book or something. Gabriel says, but you are in Texas, so it makes sense. So this microphone, we got it because it's great for, it's got USB. So that's the USB side. And it also has XLR. So that's why I got this mic, because my wife wants to be able to do some of this recording stuff on her own. So, hello, Anthony. Anthony says, hello, Eddie. Hope you are well, and you and everybody. I'm doing great. Thank you. So, let's get to Sean's question. Sean left a question on the blog. He says, how do you listen to jazz? All right. How do you listen to jazz? Oh, Anthony says he bought the One Range book. Great. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask. So, how do you listen to jazz? Can it help you play higher? Yes, it can help you play higher. That's the whole point of the book. So, how do you listen to jazz? Let's say first that I break listening into two categories. We have passive listening and we have active listening. I think most of your listening should be passive. Believe it or not, most of your listening should be passive. And it's true for all music, right? It's not just jazz. I would do this the way I listen to jazz. In fact, right now I have it all mixed up. I don't listen to just jazz or just classical. I listen to everything all mixed together. I was thinking about that on the way to a gig a couple weeks ago. I'm probably the only person in the world that goes from Castor and Pollux, that's a Baroque opera, to what's that group in New Orleans? voodoo something. It's like jazz fusion stuff to Miles Davis to um, all. I mean, it's such a weird mix of recordings. Oh, and Afrikaans music, like Buddha music. Um, I listened to two on the way to that gig. Two Buddha music thing came up, and some African stuff. Um, Jimmy, what's I think his name is Jimmy Blulu. Yes, Jimmy Blulu. I don't know if that's the right way to say his name, but I listened to some of his that day. So anyway, so passive listening is when you put the music on and you go about your day. Active listening is when you're actually studying the music. And I believe that 95% or more of your listening should be passive, not active. And a lot of people, I think they have trouble processing that, right? Because they think everything has to be so serious. That's that whole, people say you have to be mindful when you're practicing, and I don't believe that. There are times when you should be mindful, but they want to be mindful at all times, like 100% of the time. And the same thing applies to music. When you're listening to music, you don't have to be mindful 100% of the time. Okay? And then, now, there are certain things that I do when I'm doing active listening. And I guess in a sense you could have degrees of how active it is. And I'm going to give you an example of something I've been doing lately that's not as active. It's more passive. But I have this little game that I do. I have a new vehicle, and that vehicle has a sound system that I could put a thumb drive in. And I put all this music in the thumb drive, and I'm listening, and I don't let myself look, and I'm listening, and I'm trying to say, what recording is that? Who's playing? What is the tune? What album is it on? It's a little game I play with myself, right? And so that's a little bit more active uh, than the regular passive listening where you just like turn it on and go, right? Um, but that's the kind of stuff you can do. Now, the ultimate form of active listening is when you do a transcription. And a transcription is when you listen to the music and then you can play it yourself. A lot of people write it down. Most great players don't have to write it down. But yes, we would, either way, it's still called transposition, whether you write it down or not. Learning somebody else's solo by ear is the ultimate form of active listening. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Gabriel says, I play 1 hour in the morning, one in the evening, 50-50. At the end, I'm tired and I lose range. But if I try a range exercise, I go up normally. Why, when you're playing music, do you lose range, and with exercises, you don't lose range? That's a good question. You know, I think that goes along with one of the reasons why I suggest working on exercises. I mean, backwards. Suggest working on music, right? Because there are a lot of trumpet players that just won't practice music. There's a bunch of them. They claim they don't have time, and that's just not how it works. Okay? So I discovered in, not discovered, I realized in the 90s that when you're playing music, your mind, and most of this is on a subconscious level, but it's still coming from your mind. Your mind is having to take care of at least 50 things at one time. It's actually even a lot more than that when you're playing with an ensemble. Your mind has to juggle 50 thoughts when you're playing music. 50 well, not even 50 thoughts, 50 types of thoughts simultaneously, all of that going on at the same time. Exercises don't do that. When you play, the whole point of an exercise is to take some of those 50 things out of the picture. That's the whole point of an exercise. Is so like if you want to concentrate on flexibility, you take everything out except flexibility. So you're not thinking about phrasing, you're not thinking about articulation, you're not thinking about style, any of that stuff. What you're thinking about is flexibility. And that's what makes the exercises so important. Because when we don't do the exercises, we don't improve those specific things soon enough. It's like it's like opening up a car and you're going straight to that one thing that needs to be fixed. And I think the way this works with the endurance is that, now, first of all, let me say that not everybody is that way. Some people, they have less endurance on the exercises. Okay? But this could be an explanation of what you're experiencing, is that when you're doing that much, especially, here's the thing, especially if all of those individual things have not been mastered yet. So I told you there's 50 things that we think about when we're playing music, right? We have tone, we have rhythms, we have inside of the rhythm we have the metric feel, and I could go on. I mean, like I said, I counted 50, and that doesn't even include the ensemble stuff, like blending and balance and matching your the first trumpet player and stuff like that. It doesn't even include that. 50 things that we have to do, that have to think about. Now, what if of those 50, 15 of them or 20 of them have not been mastered yet? Then yes, there's a good chance that that's going to cause um, more endurance problems. Now, we've talked about this before, I think. I'm not afraid of endurance problems. I like endurance problems because when you get tired, it makes you stronger as long as you rest. So I do have a problem with what you're saying. An hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. I don't think it should be the same every day. In my opinion, it should not be the same every day. I think your range would go up faster if you practiced less on some days and more on other days. And then the time that you do have, um, let's say you have an hour set aside, you can do other stuff during that time that's not on the horn. Anthony says, and read faster? Actually, do you know what? The one range book will help you read faster, but I'm not going to get into that. So, anyway, um, Anthony says, no, I wanted to ask you, in my band, they are playing classic and Broadway music, and it gets a little hard, but I noticed if you slow it down, it's not that hard. That is correct. Um, that's the key, right? That's the key to being a great player, is practicing slow. And I know that sounds very cliche, right? That sounds very, very, very cliche. Slow it down. I don't think people practice slow enough, and I don't think most people practice slow enough for long enough. What a lot of people do is they play it slow until they get it right. Then they start speeding up. I don't think that's the best way to do it. If you want to be the best of the best of the best. Now, let's clarify something here. What I teach is supposed to be what gets you to your top potential. I don't teach mediocrity. I don't teach, well, good enough is good enough. My methods are for people who want to do the best that they can do. So someone told me earlier this week in a comment, they said, I make progress doing it this way. And I'm like, who is satisfied with just making progress? You know, it's sort of like marriage, right? You hear these people talk about marriage in such horrible terms, right? They say, if you want your marriage to survive, right? Survive. I don't want my marriage to just survive. I want my marriage to not only uh, thrive, but conquer. I want us to live victoriously. Don't talk to me about surviving. Right? And I see the same way with learning how to play the trumpet. If what you're looking for is someone who will teach you how to get by, you're getting advice from the wrong person. That's not who I am. That's not what I teach. You can go to someone else's YouTube. There's so many YouTube channels out there that will show you how to basically cheat the system, maybe, shortcuts, quick tips, stuff like that. Notice I don't have quick tips on my channel. There are no quick tips. If you want to be the best that you can possibly be, you don't go for quick tips. So when we talk about my method, so right now we're talking about should you practice slow? And I'm saying that if you want to be the best that you can be, there is nothing better than playing a piece of music at half tempo. So if it's written at 100, you play it at 50. And you play it at half tempo 50 times. That's what gets you to where you play that piece the best that you can play it. Well, it's one of the components. I actually teach 7 stages of this, and that's the I think it's the 3rd stage. Repeating the music 50 times at half tempo. Actually, I don't teach the half tempo. Half tempo is for the jazz stuff. The classical stuff we do more like 2/3 tempo. So I hope that makes sense, Anthony. Uh, Sean is here. Nice to see you, Sean. He says peace. Nice to see you. Gabriel says, well, Eddie, what about breathing with the nose? I tried a lot of ways with mouth, but I instinctively breathe with nose. Should I fix this? Um, with there's two groups of students that I make them breathe through the nose. Beginners and people who have made some sort of embouchure change. Does that make sense? Beginners, the reason why we want the beginners to not breathe through the mouth is because they have a tendency to change their embouchure when they breathe. Okay? When we don't want them to change their embouchure just because they took a breath. So until you get to where you master all that, I call it lip posture. When you have mastered that lip posture, now you can start thinking about breathing through the lips. Okay? And the same thing is just as true if you've made an embouchure change. You know, you get everything where it needs to be, and then you breathe, and it's gone. We don't want to make it gone, right? So really, you should be breathing through your nose until you have the whole embouchure thing mastered. Now, is there anything wrong with breathing through your nose always? Um, I can't think of anything that would go wrong if that's the way you do it. I can't think of anything. So, all right. Anthony says, my old teacher, he is not old. I mean, years ago, he told me slow makes fast, fast makes slow. That is correct. Your old teacher was correct. Sean McGinty says, I remember the first time seeing the funk zone chart you wrote. That was the day I learned to play slow. It changed my life. I don't even remember that. I mean, I remember that. I don't remember how it goes. Um, that's a tune that I wrote for TKO. TKO is a funk band. They call it a horn band. Um, and we used to do that with TKO back in the late 90s and then the early millennium. Yeah, TKO. And you know, I heard someone play that in Europe. So that tune has gotten around. It's gotten around a lot. Sean Burton says, for an average player who is studying jazz and listening, how long should it take to learn the jazz language? I know you will always be learning, but yeah, it doesn't work like that. So I have a student today who only started playing jazz recently. And he's got more jazz language in his playing already, in his improv, than any student I've ever taught in my whole life. And he's only been playing, and I'm talking about all of them. Even when I was teaching at HSPVA, he's got more jazz language, and he's got a sort of innate sense of jazz language. So it really doesn't work like that. I've had some students that work on the jazz language for years and years and years, and they still don't get it. Now that's rare, but it does happen. And I have to say that it hasn't happened recently, because I think that the new way that I teach learning the jazz language is superior, and you just don't see that kind of stagnation that I used to see before I started teaching that way. Um, So yeah, it doesn't work like that. You can't just say, "Oh, it takes this much time." And you can't even say that in terms of hours, right? Because some people, there's so much mental stuff that gets in the way of our progress. There's so much mental stuff and this is why I think it's so important to have your purpose very, very clear so that you stay on track. If you keep changing your mind about what your purpose is, then a lot of that mental stuff kicks in and you become undecided. You become almost irrational, and you become what happens is you start becoming very emotional. And I'm of the belief that the emotions should be put on hold until you're on stage. I don't believe the emotions should happen in your practice session, except for when you're expressing through the music, right? So if you're actually playing, the emotions should come through the music. But other than that, and we see this when people have temper tantrums, right? They make a mistake and they pound their foot or pound their leg, right? Some of the more uh, uh, drastic ones is they'll throw stuff or they'll punch the wall. That kind of stuff is not good. That doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody. So, so the listening, you know what I think happens too? I think sometimes, that whole culture thing. Let me tell you about this. There's a guy that I met that does rap music, and he's not trying to get out of rap, but he's he wants to dial it back a little bit because he doesn't like that culture. He told me he didn't want to have to wear all the chains and that kind of clothing and stuff like that. He told me this either yesterday or the day before. And you know what? To me, I'm like that part of the culture. If you're a rapper, and I don't listen to rap, but if you're a rapper and your music makes you part of that culture, then you don't have to wear the clothes. I know they say, well, that's expected of you. You don't have to do that. Okay? So, another person I like to use as an example is Clifford Brown, right? Clifford Brown, one of the reasons Clifford Brown was so many people's hero was because he was straight. And when I use the word straight, I'm talking about he doesn't take drugs. He doesn't uh anyway, I think back then they were talking about drugs. I don't know if he didn't drink or not, but he didn't do drugs. And back in those days, for a jazz player not to do drugs, that was actually remarkable, right? Um, but it was part of the culture back then to do drugs. He didn't he didn't have to do that because he was a player. If you're playing, if you um if you're a master of your horn, then you're already going to be part of that culture. Anyway, so the reason I'm saying this, I think a lot of times, I think I got off track here. I think a lot of times um, we lose track of why we're doing the listening. If you're going to be greedy about the listening, I'm going to listen to this, I'm going to listen to that, I'm going to listen to that because it's going to make me a great player. You're missing the point. You're missing the point. That's musical greed. Gimme, 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 gimme. Right? The reason we listen is to be part of the culture. And that's why I was talking about the clothing, right? When we talk about being part of the culture, it doesn't mean you got to wear the clothes that those people wear. You can wear those clothing, but if you don't like those clothing, don't wear those clothing. Right? To be part of the culture is a musical thing. We listen to the jazz not to make us better players. We make us we listen to the jazz so that we can become part of that jazz culture, which then makes us better jazz players. But if you're trying to bypass the culture with the musical greed, you're not going to be a better player. That's my opinion. I know it's kind of controversial, but that's my opinion about it. You got to be part of the culture. And the most accessible thing we have to help us be part of that culture is listening to the guys' albums. And so this is what would explain why someone could do all that work but not make any progress, because they're trying to make it an academic, sterile, quasi-scientific, and when I say sterile, I mean, get all the germs out of it, right? Get all the nastiness of all those dirty people. Try to take all that dirty people stuff out of the picture. If you can't be part of those dirty people, then you really can't play jazz. I'm sorry. And that's true for every kind of music. Okay? Gabriel says, how important is double tonguing in classical music? So let me tell you about double tonguing in my method. Well, no, let me answer your question first, and then I'll tell you about double tonguing in my method, okay? Double tonguing is not important until you need it, and then it's absolutely important, right? So, and I've seen this in my career over and over and over again. The worst time to learn how to double tongue is when you have to. The worst time to learn double tongue is when you have to learn double tongue. You need to learn double tongue before you need to learn it. That's funny. So, but let me tell you about the double tongue in the physical trumpet pyramid. I believe that with each, we were talking earlier about exercises. Now, if you understand the trumpet pyramid, right, each exercise that we do is a foundation for the next exercise. That's why I use the pyramid to represent it, because each one of these is resting on the one before. The idea is that, so when you're working on air, that's what you're thinking about is air. When you're working on your embouchure, that's what you're thinking about is the embouchure. When you're working on flexibility, that's what you're thinking about is flexibility. You're trying to focus all of your thoughts on that one thing. And as you go up in the pyramid, those things at the bottom are pushed deeper and deeper into your subconscious. They become more and more automatic. And to me, the reason double and triple tongue is at the top of the pyramid the functional reason, okay, the practical functional reason the triple tongue and double tongue is at the top of the pyramid is to force all the rest of it into your subconscious. I hope that makes sense. That's the function of the pyramid, is to make all of the physical stuff that we do automatic, so that we don't have to think about that for the rest of the day. That is the magic of the physical trumpet pyramid. And if you don't do that double tongue or the triple tongue at the end of the routine, you're not getting the full benefit of the routine. Because each one of those things in the pyramid is supposed to push all of that other stuff deeper into your subconscious. So that's my answer to that question. Sean McGinty says, just like you don't have to wear a suit to play jazz. That's absolutely right. You know, there's one of my jazz friends here in Houston. We call him Dr. Pete. I'm not exactly sure what his real name is. But he shows up to every jam session in a tuxedo. Full tuxedo. And I love him for it, right? I won't be wearing no tuxedo to the jam session. But I love seeing him show up in a jam in a tuxedo. And you know what? I remember Wynton Marsalis, when we saw him in the 80s, he came to El Paso, and he came to the rehearsal and the dress rehearsal wearing sweats. And he actually had a comment about that. I won't repeat it now, but you wear what you want to wear. I'm sorry. That's I'm very deep into the cultural stuff. And that's surprising, right? Because I'm always telling you where all the flaws are in the culture. I'm always telling you that this stuff, that this, that, like, the example I love to use is when people say, oh man, this guy's such a great jazz player because he never repeats himself. And I'm like, that's cultural. That's not true. The best players always repeat themselves all the time. But the reason I have to tell you that's cultural is because that part of the culture is screwing you up. It's my job to point out to you that that's just cultural. So just because I say the culture is important doesn't mean I'm telling you you have to do everything the culture tells you to do. I mean, well, who would do that? Right? Let me tell you how I feel about culture, because, we're seeing a lot of cultural problems in our society right now because there's, imagine, because it's the moral equivalent of what I'm doing in music, right? And there are people like that in music. So imagine if I said, these things about the culture are not true. Therefore, we should obliterate the music culture altogether. What sense does that make? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Do you know what culture is? Culture is the building, layer after layer after layer, for thousands of years of wisdom. And when you destroy a culture, you are destroying the wisdom that goes with that culture. Culture, the destruction of culture is the destruction of people. Culture is paramountly important. I don't know if that's how you say that. Let me say it the other way. Culture is paramount. We need culture to exist. There's nothing wrong with going in and saying this part of our culture is wrong. We need to not do that. But to say this part of our culture is wrong, so let's obliterate it, is foolish. It's stupid. And there are trumpet players that are like that. They will find little things that are wrong with this music culture and then go out and be against the culture. That's foolish. By being against that culture, you are turning your back on hundreds, if not thousands of years of wisdom and knowledge. That wisdom and that knowledge makes your life better. And no government, no ideology can replace that ever. That's why it's so important. I know this is not musical, but that's why it's so important that the family structure stays intact, because the family structure is the vehicle where we pass the culture down. Everybody's life is better when they have family. Now let's apply that to music. If you divorce yourself from the culture, you have to now reinvent not just the wheel, you have to invent all wheels, because now you're starting from scratch. And here's the thing about culture. I don't think most people realize just how much they're giving up when they give up their culture. I don't think people realize just how much they're giving up. It's a tragedy. In my opinion, this is the biggest tragedy of our generation. And I blame commercialism. I'm not going to get into this, right? But I blame commercialism for this. It was commercialism that made us drop our dinner times. You know, that time in the day when we all come together, sit down and have a meal. It was commercialism that caused that to go away. I call it commercialism. I don't call it capitalism. I call it commercialism. People trying to change the culture so that they can make money off of you. You can have capitalism without commercialism. Okay? Commercialism took that away from us. And now each one of us has to reinvent every tiny detail of our lives. We don't want that in our music. We can't have that in our music. You cannot make the kind of progress starting from genuine scratch on your instrument, in your music, without the culture that you would ever make being connected to the culture. It's not possible. It's not possible. And I'm not talking about necessarily taking lessons. Yes, taking lessons is part of that. Taking lessons is one way to plug into that culture. But all of that, I call it wisdom and knowledge, right? You go to a jam session, there's stuff you learn there. When you go to a jam session, you learn stuff there that you won't learn anywhere else. You play a gig with some great players, you learn stuff there. If you're the worst trumpet player in the band, and you have an attitude of wanting to hear their knowledge, their wisdom, and you can hear it verbally or you can hear it through their playing, That gives you knowledge and wisdom that you can't get any other way. And the same thing is true for lessons, right? There's stuff you learn in lessons that you can't learn any other way. You can't learn it in a video. You can't learn it in books. So videos, books, podcasts, and your lesson are entirely, that's like apples and oranges. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. Oh, I'm on fire today. Ariana says, tips for getting good at improv and jazz overall. So that's what we've been talking about today. Listening is the first tip. I said earlier today earlier in the video I said I don't do quick tips, right? But let's hit on the outline, okay? Let's hit on the outline. Listening. I believe in doing 2 hours a day of listening if you want to be a great player. Technique. You have to practice scales. You have to practice arpeggios. There's other technique stuff too, but you have to put the time into the scales and the arpeggios before you get into that other stuff. Then what we've been talking about here is the language. Now the language is connected to the listening. You should get most of your language from the listening. If you take lessons from me, we start off with, I give you some language to start off with, but really your language that you truly invest your heart into should be stuff that you heard on the recording and you said, hey, I want to do that. After language, you should be learning tunes. So what I'm giving you here, this outline, is what I call the 5 areas of study for jazz. I actually have a 5 areas of jazz study video that you can go watch. I'm just giving you the outline right now. So number 4 is learning tunes. And when we say learning tunes, you learn the what we call the head, which is the melody, and you learn the chord progressions. And how many tunes should you learn? Hundreds. You should learn hundreds of songs. Hundreds. If you want to be a good player, you learn hundreds of these, okay? And then the last one is basically, I call it the art of improv. Because you could be good at all of that stuff and be a terrible improviser. So there are things that you can do to make your improvising better. But if you don't have that other stuff, it's not going to help. You could be a better improviser, but you won't be a jazz improviser, which is not the same thing, okay? Sean says, I thought the listening was like consuming yourself into a language, i.e. French or Spanish, and then you learn to speak it. That's what I thought. Well, Sean, the people who are into speaking languages, they all know that you can learn as much as you want. But if you don't go out and actually talk to people in those languages, your knowledge is worthless. You cannot just learn the language and now you're a fluent speaker. You don't become a fluent speaker without becoming part of the culture. You have to be part of the French-speaking culture to actually truly speak French. I'm going to ask if Gabriel is still here, I'm going to ask Gabriel what he thinks about that. Because Gabriel is, I'm sure he speaks Italian because he lives in Italy, right? But he also obviously speaks English too. And so I would like to hear what Gabriel has to say about being part of the culture. to speak a language. I mean, it's actually very naive to say that you can speak a language if you don't know anything about that culture. Gabriel says, how do I recognize a double tonguing in a classic piece beyond listening it played by a professional player? You know, that's the kind of thing that's up to you. My approach to double tongue is I like to have that overlap, right? So if this is tempo, I want to be able to double tongue from this tempo all the way down to this tempo. And I want to be able to single tongue from this tempo up to this tempo. And there should be this margin between the two. There should be this margin between the two where I can do either one. So sometimes I double tongue on gigs where you wouldn't think that double tongue would be appropriate. So if I have like in a Latin piece, and I'm just making this up, but let's say there's a piece that has 4 notes and then a bunch of upbeats. Right? So I'll triple tongue that first set. I'll triple tongue that because when I triple tongue it, it puts all the emphasis in the right place. So for the double tongue or triple tongue, basically it's not a this is right and this is wrong. It's what sounds good to you. That's how I see it. Sean McGinty says, that's right, Eddie. I don't know what that's for. I'm going slow today. Sorry about that. Oh, yes, the same thing with Javier. I forgot to say Javier, too. Javier is in Chile, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously he speaks Spanish, but he does very good with the English here. Javier says, got this cheap used acrylic cup mouthpiece. First time I used one and it's awesome. Same size that the regular one, but it feels so different. Always wondered how it was to play one since I saw Bobby Shoe. Okay, well that's great. Very nice. Sean Burton says, very good. Gabriel says, I got my university degree in Scotland, living 6 years there, full immersed among Scottish people. Right, there's your answer right there. There's your you get in, you submerge yourself in that culture. If you want to speak that language, you submerge yourself in that culture. Yes, you have to study still. You still have to study the language, but you're not going to truly speak that language just by studying it. Javier says, my English school teacher never spoke Spanish so that we could be bombarded with English, listening, and forced to communicate that way. We saw movies in English and listened to music in his class. See ya once again. So that's what I'm saying. That's the process of becoming part of that culture. You know, my wife and I have been watching Afrikaans movies. And the way I see it, now I would love to invest. My Spanish is terrible. My German is even more terrible. Um, and my Afrikaans is even worse than my German. But one of the things I noticed about Spanish is that the more I hear it, the better I do at it. So like those days when I was playing so much salsa, you know, I couldn't necessarily translate stuff, but I could almost instinctively tell what people were trying to say. And then towards the end, I actually could. I think I told you guys about this before. I played in a band that everybody was Cuban and did not speak Spanish. And I had enough Spanish to do well with that. Part of that was because my my music vocabulary is much better than my regular vocabulary, obviously, because that's the work I was doing, right? So, yeah. Javier said that was his best teacher ever. And then he confirmed, yes, he's in Chile. All right. Let me look this up real quick. Okay. Anyway. So, hello, Sandra. Nice to see you. Sandra is in Brazil. Gabriel says, when you say Italian words like pianissimo and fortissimo, you are so good. You know what happened? So I know I told you guys about this before. I grew up living all over the place, right? And so my first 2 years of my life, I heard people speaking German. And then I heard Chinese and Japanese in my seventh grade years. And of course, Spanish in El Paso. And I think what happened was that um, and then one more thing. I had a teacher in college who had just gotten to the States from Belgium. And he helped me pronounce a bunch of words and stuff like that. So I think what happened was is I started to learn. Oh, and then one more thing. In music, I do a lot of choir stuff, or at least I used to. And sometimes a choir director would, if they're working on a piece in a different language, they would talk about what they call diction, which is basically pronouncing the music correctly, but in the musical context. And so, yes, I think a lot of that has rubbed off on me. So, well, I'm glad you like the way I talk. I can't stand the way I talk, but that's something else. All right. Well, guys, it looks like we're about out of time. It, I can squeeze a couple more questions in if you guys have any. Yeah, I was on fire, huh? You know, this whole culture thing gets me worked up because it's so relevant to today's news, right? What we experience in the trumpet culture is a microcosm of what's going on in the world right now. I think one of the most hateful things you can do is try to take somebody's culture away from them. It's been done in the past by totalitarian regimes, right? I don't think people understand the damage that they do. I don't think they know the damage that they do when they try to remove somebody's culture. So, and that happens. We have that going on in music right now, where people are trying to say, um, this thing that happens in this music culture is bad, so now let's do away with the whole thing. That's an awful, awful thing. What should be happening is we should be all sharing our culture. We should don't do away with it, learn from it. Anyway, like I said, I can get worked up about that stuff. I can get really, really worked up about it. Really, do you know what it is? When people act that way, it's an expression of hatred. That's what that is. It's an expression of hatred. Anyone who wants to destroy someone else's culture, it is an expression of them saying, um, we don't like you, we want you dead. All right, so I'm going to sign off. I should probably not be talking about that kind of stuff. Um, Anthony says, thank you, Eddie, for your help. Looking forward to reading your one range book. Thanks for buying the book, Anthony. I know you said you had to to anyway, I won't say that. But but thanks for getting the book. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Javier says, thank you, Eddie and friends. Have a good weekend. You guys too. It's always nice to hang out with you guys. I'm looking forward to next week. All right. We'll see you then. Take it easy. Bye.